At Rayford State Penitentiary, Florida, a man awaits the moment of his execution in solitary confinement. Wade Wilson, whose name has become synonymous with one of the state's most disturbing criminal narratives, is scheduled to meet his final fate on the 27th day of August, 2024. His story is not just a record of heinous crimes but a complex portrait that prompted significant changes in Florida's judicial system. Circuit Judge Nicholas Thompson, responsible for the Lee Circuit, could not contain his repulsion when pronouncing the capital sentence against Wilson for the brutal murders that shocked the community. During the trial session, the judge's words echoed through the room. Abominable, repugnant, inhumane terms that aligned perfectly with the perspective presented by prosecutors Sarah Miller and Andreas Gardner, who built a solid case against the accused. The court's decision left no room for doubt. For the death of Christine Melton, Wilson would receive capital punishment, complemented by an additional sentence of 5 years for auto theft. The jury's recommendation for execution acquired additional historical relevance due to a significant legislative change implemented before the first day of April 2023. Until then, unanimity was a non-negotiable requirement for such a verdict. The new legislation, however, reduced this requirement to 8 favorable votes, allowing Wilson's conviction to become a precedent under the new rules. The scenario became even more complicated when Wilson was found guilty of attempted distribution of illicit substances and conspiracy to traffic, adding 12 years to his sentence. These convictions accelerated his transfer to death row, where the prosecution confirmed that all sentences would be served simultaneously with the murders of Melton and Ruiz. During his stay in the prison system, Wilson demonstrated that his inclination toward criminal activities had not diminished. In April 2020, a specialized unit made a disturbing discovery. Illicit substances were found near Lee County Prison, all linked to him. The subsequent investigation revealed an intricate trafficking network operating within the institution, culminating in an incident where Wilson himself survived an overdose while in custody. Wilson's scheduled execution carries additional historical weight. It will be the first carried out under the new legislation implemented by Governor Ron DeSantis in April 2023. This legislative reform not only modified the parameters for imposing capital punishment but generated intense public debate about justice and due process. The elimination of the jury unanimity requirement, replaced by a qualified majority of 8 votes against 4, divided opinions among legal experts and civil society. The case gained even more notoriety when irrefutable evidence came to light, including genetic material, fingerprints, and a detailed confession from the accused himself. The speed with which the capital punishment decision was reached under the new rules served as a practical test for the newly implemented legislation. Near the courthouse, protesters gathered daily, representing both sides of the capital punishment debate. While critics argued that relaxing the unanimity requirement compromised fundamental principles of justice, defenders of the new law maintained that the measure provided swifter resolution for families who had already suffered irreparable losses. At Rayford State Penitentiary, Wilson now occupies one of the 274 cells designated for death row inmates. His living space, measuring approximately 1 meter and 80 centimeters by 2 meters and 70 centimeters, is rigidly monitored. The daily routine follows an inflexible protocol: 3 meals at predetermined times, counts conducted every 60 minutes, and strictly controlled outings for exercise or medical care. Although correspondence is allowed, access to electronic devices remains severely restricted. The phenomenon of criminal admirers that emerged in the Wilson case deserves deeper analysis. Psychologists specializing in criminal behavior have extensively studied this type of attraction to violent convicts. Hybristophilia, as it is technically known, manifests in various ways, from passionate letters to extreme acts of devotion. In Wilson's specific case, the 4,000 letters received represent only the surface of a broader and more disturbing social phenomenon. Social networks dramatically amplified this behavior. Pages dedicated to Wilson on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok accumulated millions of followers, sharing everything from sketches made during the trial to edited excerpts from his prison letters. Online support groups formed, where admirers share theories about his innocence or defend an alleged spiritual transformation during his incarceration. The impact on the victims' families was devastating. While Wilson received declarations of love and marriage proposals, the relatives of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz were forced to witness this morbid celebration of their loved one's killer. In emotional testimonies during the trial, family members expressed their outrage at the romanticization of the brutal crimes that shattered their lives. On October 7, 2019, Wilson, then 30 years old, initiated a sequence of violent acts that terrorized the region. Christine Melton, 35 years old, became his first victim after a casual encounter at a nightclub. After accompanying her to her residence and waiting for her to fall asleep, Wilson executed a brutal attack, strangling her and later assaulting her body with a metal curtain rod. Authorities found the body in a macabre scene, tied with sheets, wrists bound with a scarf, evidencing premeditation and calculated cruelty. The next day, Diane Ruiz, 43 years old, crossed paths with Wilson in a fatal encounter. After an apparently innocent approach asking for directions, Wilson attacked her when she tried to escape. The violence of the crime was evidenced by the autopsy, which revealed 11 fractured ribs and characteristic strangulation injuries. The body was later located in a wooded area, with clear signs that Ruiz had desperately fought for her survival. The psychological dimension of the case gained even more complex contours when Dr. Mark Rubino presented detailed evidence about Wilson's medical history. Brain examinations revealed patterns consistent with chronic trauma, possibly resulting from a series of incidents throughout his life. The first documented accident occurred during his adolescence, when a collision with an oak tree resulted in severe impact against the windshield. A second accident at the beach, involving multiple victims, left Wilson unconscious for a significant period. The sports concussions reported during his school years also contributed to the complex neurological picture. Wilson suffered 2 serious episodes, one during a football game and another in a baseball game. On both occasions, observers reported periods of confusion and disorientation that persisted for days after the incidents. The history of violence in his adult life included 3 severe assaults that resulted in loss of consciousness. Although complete medical records were not available to corroborate all these incidents, the physical evidence observed in brain scans supported the plausibility of these traumatic events. Wilson's connection to the supremacist organization, the Unforgiven, revealed an additional dimension of his criminal personality. Founded in 1986 in Florida prisons, this organization is known for its rigid hierarchical structure and own code of conduct. Investigations revealed that Wilson quickly rose in the group's hierarchy, using his charisma and intelligence to manipulate both other inmates and prison system staff. The escape attempt on September 30, 2020, demonstrated not only his ingenuity but also his ability to influence other inmates. The intercepted note, addressed to Lauren Curtis Sawyer, detailed a meticulously elaborated plan involving multiple participants. The subsequent investigation revealed that Wilson had studied guard movement patterns for weeks, identifying blind spots in security cameras and moments of vulnerability in the surveillance system. The damage to the cell structure evidenced patient and calculated work. The metal window frame had been removed through a process that took weeks, with prisoners masking progress with improvised materials. The metal bench, originally fixed to the ground with industrial screws, was gradually loosened to avoid suspicious noises. Witnesses later confirmed hearing muffled sounds for several nights, but the work was so well coordinated that it initially raised no suspicions. Wilson's subsequent involvement with drug trafficking inside the prison demonstrated his ability to adapt and manipulate the system. In April 2023, the Specialized Kate Unit discovered an elaborate methamphetamine distribution scheme that used multiple intermediaries. Investigations of phone calls between Wilson and Bonnie Wiggins revealed a sophisticated code used to coordinate deliveries and payments. The forensic analysis of Wilson's original crimes revealed disturbing patterns of escalating violence. In Christine Melton's case, the medical examiner identified not only obvious signs of strangulation, but also evidence of psychological torture prior to death. The meticulous arrangement of the body, with wrists tied by a specific white scarf, suggested a ritual element to the crime that investigators initially didn't notice. The attack on Diane Ruiz presented an even higher level of violence. Dr. Thomas Coyne, during his testimony, detailed the extent of the injuries. Beyond the 11 fractured ribs and neck injuries, the body showed trauma patterns indicating that Ruiz remained conscious during much of the attack, desperately fighting for her life. Analysis of where the body was found revealed signs that she tried to escape multiple times, with evidence of deep scratches in the ground and blood marks in a pattern suggesting zigzag movement. The neurological impact of Wilson's brain traumas was extensively debated during the trial. Dr. Rubino presented evidence that injuries to the frontal region of the brain could have compromised his capacity for impulse control and emotional regulation. Magnetic resonance imaging revealed areas of low activity in regions associated with empathy and moral processing, although debate about whether these alterations preceded or resulted from his history of substance abuse remained inconclusive. Forensic psychologist Dr. Michael Herhoff, however, presented a contrasting perspective. In his analysis, Wilson's behavior pattern demonstrated premeditation and calculation incompatible with severe cognitive impairment. He pointed to the complexity of criminal schemes within the prison and Wilson's ability to manipulate systems and people as evidence of preserved executive functioning. Wilson's history of substance abuse began in his adolescence, with recreational use of marijuana and alcohol, progressing to heavier drugs in his 20s. During his initial confession, he described a state of dissociation induced by a combination of methamphetamine and other stimulants during the period of the murders. However, toxicological analyses conducted after his arrest suggested that his intoxication levels at the time of the crimes may have been less severe than alleged. Wilson's defense, led by attorneys Kevin Shirley and Lee Hollander, built a strategy based on the convergence of factors: brain trauma, untreated mental illness, and chemical dependency. They argued that this perfect storm of medical and psychological conditions significantly diminished his capacity to understand the criminal nature of his acts or to conform his behavior to the requirements of the law. Prosecutor Andreas Gardner, in contrast, painted a portrait of Wilson as a calculating predator who used his intelligence and charisma to manipulate both his victims and the judicial system. During cross-examination of defense witnesses, Gardner repeatedly highlighted the methodical nature of the crimes and Wilson's ability to plan elaborate criminal schemes during his detention. The recordings of phone calls between Wilson and his father, presented during the trial, provided a disturbing glimpse into his psyche. In a particularly revealing conversation, Wilson described his crimes with an emotional detachment that shocked even the most experienced investigators. His father, visibly disturbed during his testimony, described how Wilson's animated tone when reporting the details of the murders convinced him to advise him to turn himself in to authorities. The impact of the Wilson case on Florida's judicial system was profound and lasting. The change in law that allowed death penalty convictions with a majority of 8 votes, instead of unanimity, generated heated debates about the balance between procedural efficiency and constitutional guarantees. Reform advocates argued that the Wilson case exemplified the need for more agile procedures in cases with overwhelming evidence. Critics, on the other hand, pointed to the risks of irreversible judicial errors under the new system. The medical community also divided over the case's implications for mental disorder treatment in the prison system. Wilson's history raised questions about early identification of brain trauma and its role in criminal behavior. Some experts argued that adequate interventions at critical moments in his life could have altered his trajectory, while others emphasized individual responsibility for committed acts. The victims' families faced not only the loss of their loved ones but also the additional ordeal of seeing the murderer transformed into a kind of dark celebrity. In public statements, they expressed frustration with the disproportionate attention given to Wilson at the expense of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz's memory. The impact on local communities was equally profound, with significant changes in security practices and increased demand for mental health resources. The detailed autopsy performed by Deputy Chief Medical Examiner Thomas Coyne revealed the true extent of the crime's brutality. Ruiz's body showed not only the evident trauma from the attack but also signs of prolonged exposure to natural elements, with parts of the ears and nose altered by local fauna. The documented internal injuries painted a horrifying picture: extensive bruising on the upper limbs, fractures in multiple bones, including severe damage to the hyoid bone, and a partially destroyed thyroid. During his expert testimony, Coyne provided technical details about the strangulation process that sent chills through the courtroom. He explained that between 15 and 20 seconds of compression are sufficient to cause loss of consciousness, and after 45 seconds, the damage can become irreversible. This information, combined with the physical evidence found, suggested that the victims remained conscious during a significant part of their suffering. Diane Ruiz's final moments were particularly distressing. The ground marks and trauma patterns indicated that she fought vigorously for her life, trying to escape in multiple directions before succumbing to her injuries. The pattern of rib injuries suggested that the vehicle passed over her body repeatedly, demonstrating a relentless determination to ensure her death. As Wade Wilson awaits his execution scheduled for the 27th day of the 8th month of 2024, his case continues to provoke deep reflections on justice, criminal responsibility, and the limits of rehabilitation. The complexity of his story, interweaving brain trauma, chemical dependency, predatory behavior, and manipulative charisma, defies simplistic explanations and continues to influence debates about penal system reform and treatment of violent criminals. Judge Nicholas Thompson's final words when pronouncing the death sentence summarized the case's central dilemma. "In my years on the bench, few cases have so dramatically combined elements of personal tragedy and calculated evil. Society must protect itself, even when confronted with the complexity of human nature. The legacy of the Wade Wilson case transcends the boundaries of a simple criminal process. It represents a point of intersection between fundamental issues of criminal justice, mental health, and social fascination with violent crime. While his final fate remains technically open, with legal appeal possibilities not yet exhausted, his case has already left an indelible mark on Florida's judicial system and society's collective consciousness. If you've made it this far, leave your comment about this impressive case and don't forget to subscribe to receive more content about historic criminal cases.